I want to open this one on a cool Tuesday morning in late September of 1831, on the edge of a limestone meadow in Derbyshire, England, at the precise moment a man made the kind of mistake that costs everything and gains everything, though he would not understand either of those things for nearly 3 weeks, and would spend a good deal of that time pacing in the dark. His name was Callum Stanhope, the Earl of Harwick, and he had come to Wrenfield to assess an heiress. He arrived in a hired carriage. His own coach had thrown a wheel outside Derby, and he arrived therefore slightly rumpled, slightly ahead of schedule, and in a mood that charitable observers might describe as tightly wound. He came up the lane between old stone walls and into an open meadow at the edge of the estate, and there, standing knee-deep in the autumn grass, with her boots muddy, and her dark hair pinned haphazardly under a plain felt hat, was a young woman holding a surveyor's compass and a notebook, and the unmistakable air of a frowning at something in the middle distance, with the focused expression of someone who does not intend to be interrupted. Now you and I are going to look at that young woman very carefully, because this whole story lives in who she actually was. But Lord Harwick did not look at her carefully. He looked at her. The way a man looks at a signpost, useful for a moment and immediately forgotten. And he stepped down from the carriage and crossed the grass toward her with the easy authority of a man who has spent his entire life assuming that the people around him will accommodate his convenience. "You there," he said, not unpleasantly, and I want to be fair to him, he was not unpleasant, only accustomed. "I am the Earl of Harwick. I have an appointment with Miss Wren. Would you be good enough to let the house know I've arrived, and see to the carriage while you're at it? The driver needs direction to the stable." The young woman with the compass looked up at him from under her hat. She did not startle. She did not curtsy or fumble or flush. She looked at him with a pair of very steady grey eyes, and something moved at the corner of her mouth, the barest suggestion of a thought she had decided to keep. "Of course, my lord," she said, and her voice was unhurried and clear. "I'll have someone attend to the carriage directly." And she turned back to her compass. Lord Harwick waited a moment, half expecting something more. He did not get it, so he walked toward the house, perfectly satisfied that the business of his arrival had been dispatched, and left the woman in the muddy boots standing in his meadow. Her meadow. I need to stop there. I need to hold us right at this moment, because everything that comes after lives in what just happened, and I cannot bear to move past it without making absolutely certain you have understood it. The Earl of Harwick just told the owner of Wrenfield to see to his carriage. He told Adelaide Wren, the sole heir to 400 acres of Derbyshire limestone and the finest sheep operation in the North Midlands, a woman who had managed every inch of this land herself since the age of 24, to announce his arrival at her own front door. He asked her, in the meadow she surveys every September to calculate the season's yield, to redirect a driver to a stable she built and filled, and she, standing in her own grass with her own compass in her hand, said, "Of course, my lord," and watched him walk toward her own house. Sit with that, hold that picture in your mind, because I am going to tell you everything that comes of it. Now, let me tell you who Adelaide Wren actually was, and why, on that September morning, she did not turn around and introduce herself. Her father, Thomas Wren, had been a geologist. Not a wealthy one, not a celebrated one, but a meticulous one, and in the course of mapping limestone formations across Derbyshire, he had purchased a small failing farm at Wrenfield for almost nothing and discovered beneath its thin soil a seam of high-quality building stone, so consistent and so clean that it was worth 30 times what he paid. He had spent 20 years building the estate, and when he died he left it, all of it, to his daughter. Because Adelaide was the only one of his children who had walked every mile of it with him, and he believed in leaving things to people who understood them. This was not entirely unremarkable in 1831, but it was unusual enough to make Adelaide Wren famous in 3 counties for the wrong reasons. She was known as the woman who ought to have had a brother, Men who had never met her felt entitled to pity her situation. Men who had met her found the pity revised but often replaced by something worse: appetite. Because she was rich. And in being rich, she discovered the particular burden of richness that no one warns you about. You can never be sure of anyone. From the year of her father's death onward they came. Younger sons and indebted gentlemen, and polished men with lovely manners and hollow pockets, all of them suddenly and deeply interested in Miss Adelaide Wren, all of them looking at her, looking past her, at the 400 acres behind her. She had learned to see it within minutes now. The calculation behind the compliment, the inventory behind the eyes. She had refused 4 proposals in 5 years. She had grown, not cold, I will not say cold, because cold is the wrong word for what Adelaide was, but careful. She had grown careful in the way a person grows careful when they have been burned enough times to feel the warmth before the flame. So when the letter came from the Earl of Harwick, perfectly civil, perfectly correct, requesting the honor of calling upon Miss Wren by way of a mutual acquaintance, and so forth and so on, all of it proper and all of it, to Adelaide's weary eye, perfectly transparent, she had read it once, set it down, and felt the familiar weariness settle into her, like a stone in a pond. Another one. She had been on the verge of replying with an equally civil refusal when she had a thought. A small, deliberate, slightly wicked thought, born of 5 years of being courted for her acreage. She did not send the refusal. Instead, she told her household, her housekeeper Mrs. Colby, her steward Mr. Prue, and the 2 farmhands who constituted her domestic staff, that when the Earl of Harwick arrived, he was to be welcomed as a guest, and informed that Miss Wren was unfortunately occupied with the autumn land survey, and might not be available for several days, and that they were, every one of them, to let Adelaide move about the estate, unchallenged and unannounced. She wanted to see who he was before he knew she was watching. Her staff received this instruction with the quiet satisfaction that long loyal people feel when their mistress at last decides to do something slightly ungovernable. They agreed without hesitation, and they kept their word. Which is why, when Lord Harwick was shown into the drawing-room and offered tea and told with many apologies that Miss Wren was engaged with estate matters and would receive him within the week, he had no idea that the woman who had answered his inquiry in the meadow and vanished back into the grass was the woman he had come to court. Adelaide, meanwhile, had walked home through the back fields, put on a clean pair of boots, and gone to dinner feeling, for the first time in years, mildly curious. She found him the next morning at the edge of the quarry. The working quarry at Wrenfield was not a place most house guests ventured. It was a half-mile from the house, down an unpretty path, and it smelled of wet stone and dust. But Lord Harwick was apparently not most house guests, because there he was, at 7 in the morning, standing at the quarry lip in his good coat, looking down at the stone face with an expression that struck Adelaide as less like curiosity and more like recognition. She stopped some distance away and studied him before he heard her. He was not what she had expected. She had braced for smooth and polished. She found instead a man who looked as though he had been sleeping poorly. There were shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that had nothing to do with the early hour. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and stared at the stone the way men stare at things when they are not really seeing them at all. When they are looking inward and using the landspat as a place to rest their eyes, while their mind does something harder. Adelaide said, "Mind the edge, my lord. It drops further than it looks." He turned, startled, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked nothing like an earl. He looked like a man caught thinking thoughts he had not meant to be seen having. "I apologize," he said. "I did not hear you." "No," said Adelaide, "you were somewhere else." He studied her, placing her, the woman from the meadow, presumed estate worker. "I am a poor guest," he said. "I keep early hours." "I keep earlier ones," said Adelaide. She gestured at the quarry. "What do you see?" He looked back at it, and his voice shifted to something less guarded. "Limestone, high quality, consistently bedded. My father was a builder, not a great one, but I grew up reading stone." "That is exactly right," Adelaide said, and she meant it because it was a correct reading and she had not expected it. "The beds are 18 inches. We have been working that face for 11 years. He looked at her. "You know the quarry well." "Somewhat," she said, and then, "Are you hungry? There are rolls in the kitchen garden, if you don't mind the walk." He should have said no. A proper guest does not follow a presumed estate hand to the kitchen garden. But Lord Harwick was clearly not a man in the mood for what he should do, and he fell into step beside her, and that was how it began. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. It became a pattern so quickly that Adelaide almost did not notice it happening until it was already too late to be purely strategic. They walked, they talked, he told her things. She was never sure quite at what point in the morning walk the careful distance went out of his voice, but it went reliably within the first quarter hour. He told her about Harwick Park. It had been his family's for 200 years, and it was dying. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way good things die when people who love them do not have the money to keep loving them, slowly, from the edges in. The roof in the east wing had been patched 4 times with timber they could no longer afford. 2 tenant farms had gone unoccupied for 3 years because repairs to the cottages were beyond the estate budget. The land was good, but the infrastructure was failing. And there was simply no money to fix it. Because his father before him had been a generous and improvident man who had spent 30 years giving away more than he had. "It is not ruin," Lord Harwick said, one morning at the edge of the lower field, looking at the limestone walls with an expression that hurt to see. "It is decline, which in some ways is harder. Ruin has a clean edge to it. Decline just goes on and on, a little worse each year. And you can always tell yourself next year will be different." Adelaide, walking beside him, said nothing. She had learned by the 3rd morning that silence was the thing he needed. Not agreement, not advice, just a person willing to stay present in the difficult passages of a sentence. "I came here," he said on the 4th morning, "to court your mistress." Adelaide's step did not falter. "I know," she said. "I expected you did." He stopped walking. "I am not a man who lies easily, and I will not insult you by pretending I came for any other reason. I came because Miss Wren is wealthy and unmarried, and my house requires. I cannot watch it go piece by piece and do nothing." He turned his hat in his hands. "There are 3 tenant families who have lived at Harwick for generations. They depend on the estate. I am the wall between them and the estate's failure, and I am not strong enough to be that wall on principle alone. So I am here." Adelaide said, "That is an honest thing to say." "It is the only way I know how to say it." He looked at her sidelong. "You are unusually easy to talk to." "I have been told," said Adelaide carefully, "that it comes from asking fewer questions." "Most people ask too many," he said. "Most people want to fill the quiet," she said. "I have found the quiet tells you more." He was quiet a moment, and then he said, "Do you know what I cannot make my peace with? Not the marrying for money. Men have married for worse reasons since the beginning of time. What I cannot make my peace with is the deception, the performance of an attachment I do not feel, to a woman I have never met, who will spend her life believing herself loved by a man who needed her bank account. I am about to make her the central lie of my existence, and she will never know it." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I was raised by a man who could not keep accounts, but kept his word to every person he ever gave it. And I am going to spend my life breaking faith with a woman who has done nothing to deserve it." The morning was very still. Adelaide kept her eyes on the path ahead, because she could not turn and look at him. In 5 years of being courted, not one man had sat down in the plain dirt of his own situation and said, "I know what I am doing, and it is wrong, and I cannot reconcile it, and I am telling you because you are the only person I have not yet had to lie to." In 5 years, not one of them had thought of her as a person who could be deceived. They had thought of her as a sum to be acquired, and the question of her feelings, her actual interior life, her right to an honest accounting, had not entered any of their careful calculations even once. And here was a man she had set out to study from a safe distance, breaking apart over the wrong of deceiving her to what he believed was a hired hand in a felt hat. Adelaide said very quietly, "Then perhaps don't deceive her." He laughed, short and without humor, and lose the purpose of the visit in the first sentence. "No, I have no room for honesty. That is what it is to need money in the way I need it. Not the want of bread, I will not exaggerate, but the want of the right to tell the truth. Honesty is a luxury I cannot currently afford." He paused. "Forgive me. I have made a habit of unburdening myself to you at hours when you are trying to do your work, and it is unbecoming in a guest." "I don't mind it," said Adelaide. "You are very kind," he said. "Better than the situation deserves." Adelaide said nothing. She folded her notebook and tucked it under her arm and walked beside him in the thin autumn light, and tried to calculate what she had done and what it was going to cost her, and found she could not make the numbers work. "Before I tell you what came next, I need you to understand something. You may be tempted at this point in the story to make Lord Harwick the simple thing, the fortune hunter, the calculating man, the easy villain of a piece with a clear moral, but he is not that, and he never was, and if I let you believe otherwise, I am not doing my job. Lord Harwick was a man in genuine pain at a genuine crossroads, doing what he believed was the only thing left to do, and hating himself for it with an honesty that is, in its way, its own kind of integrity. He had not come to Wrenfield with a smooth face and a smooth plan. He had come telling the truth to a woman he thought was no one, because he no longer knew where else to put it. That is the man Adelaide Wren was falling in love with. And she knew it was happening before she had the words for it, the way you know weather before you see clouds, just a change in the quality of the light. It came apart on a Thursday evening, in the last of the day's sun, at the low stone wall on the western boundary where Adelaide liked to end her walks. They had come there after the day's work, his being the purposeless restlessness of a man waiting for a meeting he dreaded, hers being the surveying of the north field that she had abandoned 3 times that week, unable to concentrate. They had ended up at the wall by a kind of mutual gravitational drift, and for a while neither of them said anything. And then Lord Harwick said, "I have made a decision." Adelaide looked at him. "I am going to withdraw my suit," he said it steadily, looking at the view. "When Miss Wren receives me, I am going to tell her I have reconsidered. I will not give her the real reason. I owe her that much privacy, at least. But I am going to withdraw." Adelaide felt her pulse catch. "And Harwick Park?" "I will find another way, or I won't." His voice was quiet and certain. "I will sell something the Ashton timber. I have been refusing to touch it because my father planted half of it himself, but—" he shook his head. "I cannot do this. I have walked this estate for 9 days. I have talked to you every morning in a field. And every morning I have left you and gone back to the house and thought about how I am here to bind myself for life to a woman I have never spoken to, and every morning the thought is more impossible than the day before." "That is not," Adelaide said carefully, "because of this estate." "No," he said, "it is not." He turned to her, and the evening light was sitting on the western field like a benediction. "I am in love with you. That is the fact of it. I have no idea how it happened. I have been here 9 days, but it has happened, and I have stopped arguing with it. And the only honorable thing I can do is tell you so, and then release you from having to respond, because I am asking nothing of you. You work here. You have no reason to care about the inheritance problems of a man you met in a meadow. I know that. But I needed to say one true thing to one honest person before I go in there and perform the withdrawal of a courtship that never should have started. And you are the only person in my life right now who knows the whole of it." Adelaide stood at the wall, with her hands pressed flat against the cold stone, and felt the precise sensation of a decision closing around her, not being made but closing, like a door that was always going to swing that way. She had sat with the lie for 9 days. She had told herself each morning that today she would tell him, and each morning she had found one more reason to wait, and she knew, had known for 4 days at least, that the reason she kept waiting was fear. Fear that when he knew, when the test was over, when the plain woman in the muddy boots became the heiress he had come to court, she would lose the only honest thing that had come to her in 5 years. She had made herself into exactly what she despised in the men who had courted her. She had weighed him against a false measurement and called it fair. She turned to face him. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond, and you are going to be angry with me, and you will have every right to be." He waited. "I am not Miss Wren's estate worker," said Adelaide. "I am Miss Wren. This is my wall. That is my Northfield. The compass you saw on the first morning belongs to me. I have been managing this survey myself since March, the way I manage everything here, in field clothes suited to the work and not to impressing visitors." She held his gaze. "I knew from the moment you asked me to announce your arrival, and I said nothing. Every morning in the fields since then, I have let you speak to me as though I were a stranger with no stake in what you were saying, and I knew, and I said nothing, because I was tired. Because I have spent 5 years being courted by men who saw 400 acres with a woman attached, and I wanted for once to see who you were before you knew I was watching. And I am sorry. That is the plainest thing I know how to say. I am sorry." The light was still on the field. A starling called somewhere in the stone wall. Lord Harwick did not speak. She watched the understanding move through him, not all at once, but in pieces, and she watched each piece land, the meadow, the carriage, the quarry. 9 mornings of a man telling his worst truths to a woman he thought had nothing to lose by hearing them. He had said all of it, and she had known all of it, and she had been the subject of every word. 9 days, he said at last. His voice was very even. "Every morning in the fields you let me." "Yes. You knew I had come to court you. You heard me say I could not live with the dishonesty of courting a woman for her money, and you were that woman." "Yes." "And you said nothing." "Yes." He turned away from her, looked at the field. A muscle worked in his jaw. "I said things to you. I said things I have not said to another living person." "I know." Was any of it? He stopped. And this was the heart of it. She could feel it, the question beneath every other question. Was I simply observed? Was I an experiment you were running on a man too heartsick to notice he had an audience? Adelaide did not flinch. She had prepared herself not to. "At the start," she said, "it was a study. I will not lie to you about that. Not now. Not ever again. I arranged it deliberately, and I told my household to keep it, and I watched you for the first 2 mornings with the distance of a woman who has been hunted long enough to learn caution. That is the truth." She stepped toward him. "And then I listened, and what I heard was a man who had come to court a fortune and could not stop telling the truth about why it was wrong to do so. You thought of me, of her, as someone with an interior life worth protecting. That is not a small thing, Lord Harwick. That is the one thing not a single man in 5 years has managed to do. And somewhere between the quarry and this wall, the distance collapsed, and I stopped watching, and I knew I had to tell you, and I was afraid, and I let one day become another. And then this evening you stood here and told me you were giving up the entire purpose of your visit, for love of a woman with muddy boots and no prospects, and I could not let you build one more plan on a foundation I had made false." She stopped. "So here it is, the whole of it." He was quiet for a long time. The starling called again. The last of the sun pulled away from the western field and left the stone cold and grey. Then he said, "The compass." "Pardon. The first morning, I told you to see to my carriage, and you were surveying your own field." "Yes." "With your own compass." "Yes." He pressed his hand over his face and stood like that for a moment. When he lowered it, something in his expression had shifted, not softened exactly, but resettled, like stone finding its level. He looked at her once, then walked back toward the house without a word. And she stood at the western wall in the last of the light, and accepted that she had perhaps lost. At last, the only honest man who had ever been within losing distance of her. He found her in the morning. She was at the quarry again. She always came back to the quarry when she needed to think, because there was something in the reliable bedded stone that calmed the part of her that wanted to fly apart. She heard him on the path and did not turn around. He stood beside her and looked at the stone face for a moment. "I have done the honest arithmetic," he said, "because it is the only kind I am able to do consistently, and here is what it tells me." Adelaide waited. A woman who was weary past bearing of being wanted for her land arranged a cowardly, defensive, imperfect thing to protect herself from one more performance of devotion she did not trust, and in doing it, she gave me, without meaning to, the only evidence I will ever need that my own heart is what I believed it was. He paused, because I stood at that wall on a Thursday evening and told an estate worker I believed to be penniless that I was abandoning my family's salvation for love of her. I did it freely, with everything to lose, with my eyes open and my arithmetic clear. He turned to look at her. "You watched me choose you when I believed you had nothing. I cannot unchoose that, neither of us can. And whatever else you did, and I am still angry, I will not pretend otherwise, I will be angry about it for some time yet. You have given us both the one thing that wealth makes nearly impossible." He held her gaze. "Certainty," he said. "You know I did not come for the estate, because you watched me turn my back on it, and I know you are not responding to a man who needs your money, because you arranged 9 days in which I had no reason on earth to perform for you, and that is what I gave you anyway. We are." He stopped, made a sound that was almost a laugh. "We are the only two people in Derbyshire who can say, with absolute certainty, that they are loved entirely for themselves. There is not another pair in the county who can make that claim." "You are still angry," said Adelaide. "Yes," he agreed, "I am, and I am asking you to marry me anyway, because apparently I am incapable of making a sensible decision where you are concerned, and at this point I see no reason to begin." He held out his hand. "Come back to the house, not as Miss Wren and a man uncertain of his welcome, as two people who have been extraordinarily foolish and somehow arrived somewhere worth keeping." Adelaide looked at his hand for a long moment. "I owe you a proper apology," she said, "a real one, when you are ready to receive it." "I will collect it," he said, "alongside the compass." "The compass? I want the compass, as evidence. For when people ask how we met and I need something to put in their hands so they stop asking questions." Adelaide Wren, who had not laughed freely in front of a man in 5 years, who had not been able to afford it, laughed, and she put her hand in his, and they walked back up the limestone path toward the house in the morning light. Two people who had been thoroughly, mutually, and quite spectacularly dishonest with each other, and had somehow arrived, by that exact road, at the one thing neither of them had believed they would ever find: the knowledge that they had been chosen as they were, and not as what they owned. They married the following spring, and the county was entirely unprepared for it, having written Lord Harwick off as too proud and Miss Wren as too peculiar, and having been wrong about both. Harwick Park was repaired, the east wing roof held, the tenant cottages were rebuilt, one by one, over 4 years. The Ashton timber was never touched. And Adelaide Wren, Countess of Harwick, never stopped carrying her surveyor's compass, and never stopped walking her own fields in field clothes. And every new visitor to Wrenfield for the rest of her long life made the same instinctive mistake. Took the woman with the muddy boots and the focused expression for something other than the lady of the house. She always enjoyed it enormously, more with every passing year. The compass, for its part, sits to this day, in a small case on the library table at Wrenfield, between the window and the fire, where the morning light catches the brass face of it and makes it glow like something precious. Which it is. Because it is the instrument that was in her hand on the morning, a man made the kind of mistake that changes everything, and did not know it for 9 days. And it is, as Adelaide always said, proof of the only certain courtship in the whole of Derbyshire. You have stayed by my fire through a deception and an honest reckoning, and a courtship built on limestone and stubbornness, and I am glad of your company at the end of it. If this story gave you something, a warmth, a quiet laugh, a small, fierce reminder that the truest things still find their way to the people who deserve them, then I hope you will do one thing before you go. Subscribe to Moonlight at Marlowe. There are many more evenings by this fire, and each story is its own thing, and I would not want you to miss a single one. And if you will not subscribe, well, you have been here long enough to know how I feel about debts. I am patient, I never forget. And there is always another story waiting for exactly the moment you decide to come back. Good night, dear friends, and mind how you judge a person by their field clothes. You never do know who surveyed the land.